All right, everybody. Serious question. Super serious question. And it matters to you. It matters to your life because if we're not careful about it, things can go wrong. Have you ever felt overwhelmed in your life and made a really big decision where later you realized, wow, I probably shouldn't have made that decision at that point in time? Has that ever happened to you where you're overwhelmed and you just really feel compelled, prone to action to make a really big decision because you're so overwhelmed? That's what I'm going to talk about in this video for a few minutes. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, and one of the main goals that I have in my channel here at YouTube, Dr. Seth Psychologist, is to help us all look at our decisions, the way we make decisions, and hopefully with greater insight into what our motivations are. When we're most likely to make decisions that aren't so good for us, we can become more aware of it and learn to make better decisions because, of course, our decisions determine our future. All right. Here is the number one point that I want to make on this issue of decision making. When you find yourself in a point in life when you feel emotionally overwhelmed, this is when you can be most vulnerable to making decisions that later you could go on to regret. Now, let me just give an example because I don't want this to be too abstract or willy-nilly. Here's an example. You are dealing with the loss of, let's say, a loved one, someone that you really love and you miss. And so, of course, you feel all sorts of intense emotions, maybe sadness, maybe even some anger, loneliness. Maybe you feel isolated in your life. You have all sorts of emotional needs that you don't know how they're going to get met going forward with this person gone. This is one example where you feel really overwhelmed in life. Now, why do you think, anyone watching this, why do you think sometimes when we're overwhelmed, making a decision, deciding, you know what, we're going to make a decision, why do you think that sounds appealing? Why do you think that is an attractive idea to a lot of people when they feel the most overwhelmed? Why do people actually turn to making decisions as a way to cope with the intense feelings they're dealing with? Why? Because it can give people in that moment a sense of control. When you feel overwhelmed in your life, you may feel like the messiness of your feelings, the intensity of your emotions can sometimes make you feel like things are out of control. Well, making a decision, getting to make a decision, and installing some sort of order about something in your life can sometimes make a person feel like, well, they have a more clear path going forward. They have a little bit more control over their circumstances. They know what they're going to do next. Making decisions can sometimes give people this false sense of control and order. Okay. Now, of course, there are times when making a big life decision is important and even necessary. But when that usually happens, you really have noticed that feeling over a period of time. You have discussed it over a period of time with people in your life, who are level headed. They've given you feedback about that decision and said things like, yeah, I think that decision is a good one for you to make. So there is no doubt that sometimes making big life decisions is important. But when you find yourself really overwhelmed in your life in some way, whether, as I gave an example, it's the loss of a loved one, or maybe it was a romantic breakup, or maybe you just lost your job. In these situations, It can be so tempting when you feel like life is just out of control to want to look to another area of your life and say, well, you know what? I'm going to insert some control over this area. I'm going to make a decision. So as an example, you just had a terrible breakup and all of a sudden you decided, you know what really is making me unhappy? My job. I need to find a new job. Okay, this is the kind of quick, impulsive, emotional, sometimes irrational thinking that can cause a person to make a very big decision that later they may regret. So, what I encourage people to do when they feel really overwhelmed because of something that's going on in their life, this is sometimes a time to pause. When you find yourself wanting to make a major decision about another area of your life, just to have some sort of sense of control and order, sometimes it can be helpful to pause. Talk to a trusted friend or a family member who you feel close to and you can really count on emotionally. You can always talk to a mental health therapist. When you find yourself really feeling that urge, almost a craving to act on impulse and make a big decision, remember these simple tips that you can follow. Pause, talk to someone you trust, and ask yourself if this area of life where you want to make a change, if as a pattern, you have really felt unhappy and you have really known that this is a problem. If so, remember that some decisions don't need to be made immediately or tomorrow. They can be made in a week if you still feel the same way, in 2 weeks, again, if you still feel the same way, and so forth. Okay? Resist impulses to make big decisions by being careful, by being mindful about the way that you make decisions and also the circumstances, how emotional or logical you probably are at that time. These are all really important things to think about so you can ensure that the decisions that you make will serve you the best in the long run. Okay? I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist.